On July 28, 1945, it was business as usual at the Empire State Building, then the world's tallest. Workers were busy and sightseers were enjoying the observation deck when, without warning, the building shuddered. Flames erupted. Suddenly, there was a gaping hole in the skyscraper 79 stories up, with the remnants of a plane sticking out of it. Within minutes, a daring rescue was underway, but not everyone would survive, and those who did would never forget what they lived through. The plane was a B-25 Mitchell called Old John Feather Merchant. The captain, Lieutenant Colonel William Franklin Smith Jr., was a decorated pilot. During World War II, he'd flown 50 missions in Europe. Alongside Smith was his co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Christopher Dimitrovich, plus a third man, naval aircraft mechanic Albert Perna, who was traveling to be with his parents after learning that his brother had been killed in an attack on a U.S. Navy ship near Japan. It should have been an uneventful troop transport between two bases, but something went horribly wrong. There was thick fog that day. Smith's wife, Martha, told the Winston-Salem Journal he was so dubious about the weather and said flying conditions would be poor. Smith had flown plenty of bombers, but never a B-25. The plan was to take off from Bedford Army Airfield in Massachusetts, headed for LaGuardia and Queens. But due to the fog, air traffic controllers at LaGuardia rerouted them mid-flight, sending them to Newark, New Jersey instead. For some reason, Smith didn't change direction. He continued towards Queens, but got disoriented in the fog and ended up flying through Midtown Manhattan. Lieutenant Alan Iman, a pilot who witnessed the crash, told the New York Times, "The visibility was zero. I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe my own eyes when I saw the plane come out of the overcast." Flying extremely low to dip below the fog, Smith would have known where he was and that he was in big trouble. We'll never know what Smith's reaction was when he found himself flying between Manhattan skyscrapers. He had to maneuver his aircraft to avoid the Chrysler Building and the New York Central Building, among others. Nanette Morrison, a typist who worked on the 38th floor of an office near the Empire State Building, told the Cleveland Press the plane flew so close to her window that she could see the two crew members in the cockpit, recalling, "I almost waved to them. Then I realized they were in trouble." Boston Braves pitcher Mort Cooper was in his room at the Commodore Hotel when he saw the plane pass before coming dangerously close to the RCA building, now known as 30 Rockefeller Plaza. But all these evasive maneuvers meant Smith found himself heading straight towards the Empire State Building. In an office 5 blocks away, James E. Ager was using a dictaphone when the plane flew by. Arthur Weingarten, author of a book on the tragedy called The Sky is Falling, told NPR, "You can hear Ager on the tape dictating the letter, and the sound of the engines gets louder and louder and louder as it passes by his office window. Suddenly his voice stops, and a second or so later on the tape you hear a dull thud, which is the impact of the bomber into the Empire State Building." Army Air Force officer Lieutenant Aubrey B. Condit saw the crash from a nearby building. He watched the plane dip below the fog when the pilot would have seen the Empire State Building ahead. As he told the Brooklyn Eagle, the pilot had a minute to see how he was going to die. On the streets and in the neighboring buildings, everyone who saw the plane knew disaster was imminent. Sports announcer Stanley Lomax, who saw the plane from his car, recalled yelling at the pilot, writing, "Climb, you damn fool, climb." New York Times editor Walter Daniels was walking to work when the plane flew overhead, recalling, "The roar of the motors sounded ominously low, and it seemed to be going at a terrific speed. Everyone in sight started running for Fifth Avenue to see what was happening." Nanette Morrison, the typist who'd almost waved to the pilots, said, "The pilot was obviously trying to climb, but the plane didn't go up except slowly. So slowly it almost drove you mad watching his completely futile efforts. There was nothing anyone, not even the pilot, could do." Unable to climb fast enough to get over the then tallest building in the world, the plane hit the Empire State Building around the 79th floor. At that moment of impact, future showgirl and actress Gloria Paul was working in the USO office on the 56th floor. She told NPR, "I was at the file cabinet and all of a sudden the building felt like it was going to just topple right over. It just threw me across the room and I landed against the wall. People were screaming and looking at each other and didn't know what to do. We didn't know if it was a bomb or what happened." Louis Petley was talking to 35 tourists at the building's 86th floor observation tower when the plane hit. As he remembered, "I never heard anything like it in my life. The people started rushing around. I told them, wait a minute, now wait a minute." Despite being above the impact zone, Petley managed to get everyone in his group out of the building safely. The plane opened up an 18 by 20 foot hole that stretched from the 78th through the 80th floors. 20 floors had their windows blown out. Wreckage flew everywhere. There are some people who even claim to have pieces of it today. Part of the plane remained there, sticking out of the building. Debris fell to the streets. The engine flew all the way down the block and crashed into a penthouse art studio where it burst into flames. Other bits of the plane struck buildings, landed on rooftops, and ended up in the streets next to astonished witnesses. But somehow, no one outside the aircraft or the Empire State Building was killed. The people in the Empire State Building working, who were close to the impact site, saw terrible things. Decades later, Therese Fortier-Willig, who was 20 years old, working on the 79th floor, told NPR, "Mr. Fountain was walking through the office when the plane hit the building, and he was on fire. His clothes were on fire. His head was on fire. 6 of us managed to get into this one office and close the door before the fire engulfed us. There was no doubt that the other people must have been killed." Donald Maloney, a 17-year-old Coast Guard hospital trainee, ran into the building and rushed to the 79th floor. He told the Brooklyn Eagle, "I picked up 2 heads and parts of 4 bodies and helped stack them on a table. I must have carried and treated about 20 people. All of them were burned and suffering terribly from shock. Between the 3 passengers from the plane and those in the building, 14 people died and 24 people were injured that day, but it could have been far worse. It happened on a Saturday, so only about 1,500 people were in the building. On a weekday, up to 15,000 people would have been working in the building when the plane hit." The horrific events of that day inspired a number of ordinary people to do extraordinary things to help the injured and dying. Donald Maloney, the 17-year-old who ran toward danger rather than away, hurried to a nearby drugstore when he saw the accident. He demanded all the bandages and drugs they had and was soon caring for the injured with injections of morphine, despite being well aware that he could face drug charges for doing so. Engineer Arthur E. Palmer and his assistant DJ Norden managed to stop a badly burned female elevator operator from jumping out a window in her panic. They dragged her back into their office, but smoke was filling the room, and they knew they had to get out. The 2 men used a hammer to break through the wall, and as Palmer recalled, when the hole was big enough, Norden went through. He took the elevator girl's arms. I took her legs, and we hauled and shoved her through. After I crawled out, we took her by the arms and led her through the empty office into a corridor that led us to a stairway. Thanks to their quick thinking, all 3 survived. Penny Skepko and Barbara Brown, clerks who worked for air cargo, chose not to evacuate in order to help care for the injured. This probably saved their lives. The elevator they would have taken plunged to the bottom of the building. Despite their second brush with death that day, the 2 women assisted rescuers in the building for 5 hours. Their boss at the time said, "In the midst of all the screaming, hysterical persons that were brought into the office, they performed yeoman service in helping doctors and calming the more excited of the injured." The tragedy that day resulted in one of the most astonishing tales of survival ever. Elevator attendant Betty Lou Oliver was in her elevator on the 80th floor right next to the impact site and was badly burned.
The engine, traveling at well over 300 miles an hour, cut all 16 lifting cables of her elevator.
She told the Courier News, "The elevator seemed to stop and shudder for a moment. Then it began plummeting downward. I was going down so fast that I just had to hang on to the sides of the elevator to keep from floating." Oliver fell 75 stories, breaking her pelvis, back, and neck, but she survived. It was likely small consolation considering her injuries, but according to the Guinness Book of World Records, Oliver's was the longest fall survived in an elevator. Not exactly the easiest way to set a world record. The crash sent flaming gasoline pouring through the building. It was an unprecedented conflagration, the highest fire ever in New York City history at that time. Hundreds of New York City firefighters were dispatched to the 4-alarm disaster. Therese Willig told NPR, "All of a sudden here were firemen and they're coming to rescue us, all dressed up in their raincoats and whatever they wear, and it was just wonderful. We climbed out through the broken glass. I was just grateful to be alive." The firefighters did an exceptional job of containing the fire, and the resulting damage was very limited. At the time, the use of walkie-talkies in rescue was cutting edge. They'd been in limited use by the fire department for less than a decade, but with phone lines in the building severed by the crash, they were vital for firefighters dozens of stories up who needed to communicate the situation to those on the ground. The success of the rescue operation that day inspired other fire departments and even other countries to adopt some of the FDNY's advances. On July 28, 1945, there were actually restrictions in place when it came to flying around New York City, including a rule that planes could not descend below 5,000 feet. Even including the length of its antenna, the Empire State Building is only 1,454 feet tall. The accident should have been impossible. After the disaster, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia was furious. New York Times reporters overheard him insisting, "I told them not to fly over the city." Before the day was over, 2 different probes, one by the U.S. Army and the other by the New York Fire Department, were already underway. So you would think there was zero chance of a similar accident ever happening again. But just 4 days before the first anniversary of the tragedy, another plane came dangerously close to crashing into the Empire State Building, terrifying onlookers. On July 24, 1946, a twin-engine plane flew within 200 feet of the skyscraper, even lower than Smith's doomed B-25, swerving out of the path of the building when it was at the level of the 68th floor. Office workers told police what they saw, but the aircraft had no obvious markings, and the identity of the person flying it remains a mystery to this day.